The run-ins between the government of India and Twitter have been growing in intensity day by day. And today, Ravi Shankar Prasad, the Minister for IT, came out on the microblogging site and in other forums to say very clearly that Twitter has defied all of the rules that the Indian government has set down. Government sources also said that Twitter has lost its legal cover in India, and a case has been lodged against Twitter in Uttar Pradesh for a case where a man was shown in a video being attacked. It was put out as a communal attack, and Uttar Pradesh police say it was not in fact a communal attack. The video went viral. The government is upset, saying that why didn't Twitter put a manipulated media tag on this particular incident when they have chosen to for other incidents in the past. Meanwhile, it's not very clear what the implications are for Twitter. Twitter, in a statement later in the day, came out and said that they're making every effort to comply with Indian rules. Now, it's an important angle and an important case study of what is happening, because intermediary guidelines, in a sense, protect all of these platforms from legal liability. So that means if someone puts something on these sites or posts something on these sites, the platform is not responsible legally for what is being said. Will that change? Can that change? To speak on this, I'm joined now by Arvind Gupta, who's the head of the Digital India Foundation. I'm speaking with Apar Gupta of the India Freedom Foundation, in the Internet Freedom Foundation, and Akriti Gaur, policy lawyers, also with us on the show this evening. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Apar, let me start with you first, because you've been saying that Twitter has not in fact lost its intermediary status, and that only a court can decide what happens next. But we have already seen an FIR naming Twitter. So can you just explain the whole picture to us first?
So you've explained the fundamental basis of how immunity is given to an intermediary for any user post. This is done under the Information Technology Act, which defines what an intermediary is. And there is no process for registration. There's no process for grant of revocation for what is an intermediary. As per this definition, there are further references to intermediaries such as social media companies under, let's say, the blocking powers, or even under its immunity. And what we are discussing right now is the immunity. So there cannot be a revocation of an intermediary status. What can be is the removal of the protection of immunity for an intermediary. This removal by itself, even if we presume these processes which are compliances necessary for the immunity as spelled out under the IT rules, and there is clause 7 there, has not been complied with, it will fall to an individual case like this. In this UP case, if there are certain allegations made against Twitter, Twitter goes to the High Court because their officers may be questioned or they may be under threat of arrest, and then it falls to the High Court then to go through whether Twitter has been compliant or non-compliant, and then to assess whether that immunity can be given to it or cannot be given to it. The government statements right now which have come through can also be a part of that determination, but it goes to a court, because the immunity is essentially in play in a judicial forum. It's not in play as a consequence directly before the government itself.
Okay, so Arvind Gupta, do you could go with that stance? Simply put, it's not up to the government to withdraw this protection. It will play out in a court of law. Is that what we're going to see? And is this likely to land in court?
Well, let me give you some background. That is step 0, and then explain what Apar has said is step 1. Number 1, there was a deadline, 25th of February, these new rules were made public, notified. Then there was a 3-month window, May 26th, that window closed. A lot of platforms, SSMIs, which are called social media, significant social media intermediaries, came back, complied with most of the things, and they followed the rule of the law of India and the rule of the land. government in its own, giving a long rope, I think, to Twitter, allowed Twitter, actually wrote to Twitter saying you have still not complied, gave them another, about 7 to 10 days to comply. And Twitter still did not respond till June 5th or 7th. Now, let me first agree with Apar. The government has not issued an order saying we have revoked the safe harbor provisions. It is automatic. If you are not following the provisions of the law under which you are seeking protection, you have already lost the safe harbor provision. And when will the safe harbor provision be questioned? Apar is right. When somebody goes to the court will educate whether you are in the safe harbor period or not, and whether you are protected by safe harbor. The government doesn't come out with a list saying, hey, Twitter, today you have lost all safe harbor provisions of as an intermediary. And, there's a list that we have declared. None has been done like that. And, it's unfortunate that Twitter is behaving like the way it is behaving. And it's trying to showcase itself as a champion of freedom of expression, freedom of speech in India. I must point out the hypocrisy in that. They have in the past been the most opaque platform, very biased in the way they've acted, they have always hidden behind those algorithms in deflatforming people, in taking people, suspending a lot of accounts, taking content off. And today, I don't think so. India has outsourced, not the government. India has outsourced its freedom of speech or freedom of expression rights to Twitter. They're not a champion of freedom of speech or rights or freedom of expression rights for citizens of India in India. I think Indians are very capable. Indian law, Indian democracy is very capable of doing that.
Sure. I will come to the question of whether this is a freedom of speech point of view at all ahead in the show. You've kicked that part off, Arvind, but I will come to it in more detail ahead. I want to first focus on what the factual position is. And both Apar and Arvind have so far underlined that there is no intermediary status that has been revoked or anything that has lapsed, but the protective shield, the safe harbor cover, has now ceased to exist for Twitter because they are not complying with the government's rules in the government's view. Akriti, how does this then play out? Who has to come out and say that Twitter no longer has safe harbor? And will this eventually have to be put to test in a court of law?
Yeah, absolutely, Tamanna. The way, as in Apar also described this, Twitter has not lost its intermediary status. But when it comes to safe harbor protections, what simply happened is that, because it's not complied with a part of the due diligence obligations, today or tomorrow, there are a number of parties which can, file FIRs against it or, criminal complaints against the platform. What is essentially going to happen is, Twitter may choose to challenge these in court, and the court will then have to sort of take factors into consideration, look at this question of law to see that, whether non-compliance of one aspect of these rules, which is the appointment of a chief compliance officer, is, perhaps grave enough, or if it is significant enough for the social media intermediary to lose safe harbor protections. And we must remember here that safe harbor is, it forms the bedrock of free speech and expression in, digital spheres, not just in India, but across the world. So it will be a question of free speech and, expression that will be considered. And at the same time, as in just reiterating the fact that right now, the government has not single-handedly sort of pointed out that Twitter is the platform which is losing intermediary status. The due diligence obligations under the IT rules also contain a host of other obligations and responsibilities, like breaking of end-to-end encryption, or tracing originators, etc., or setting up takedown requirements. Now, there are several platforms which may or may not have complied with it. So I also want to point out that if we really look at the level of compliance with the due diligence obligations right now, we may find there are more platforms than Twitter that may be offending it. But ultimately, this is a question that the courts will have to resolve.
Okay, so it has to come to courts, and as Akriti pointed out, this is beyond a Twitter story. So end-to-end encryption, for example, is WhatsApp then in violation of these rules, do they then lose safe harbor, and how do you put it to the test? So apart, just to quickly understand this once again, there is an FIR right now with Twitter as a party in Uttar Pradesh. It's not as if FIRs in the past have not added on intermediary platforms. Does this now mean that they can be liable and there will be more and more police complaints and FIRs perhaps coming, adding on Twitter, Facebook and other platforms for the content that is put out on them by users of those sites?
I think definitely. I think there's quite a rise in the number of criminal prosecutions for platforms, but there are several factors to this. The first is the number of users itself has risen. Secondly, you can just look at the TRAI data. The second is that the content moderation practices, as Arvind was pointing out, lack transparency and accountability quite often, which give rise to grievance. Quite often people across the political spectrum allege that there is a underhandedness, there's a selectiveness, and quite often then it concentrates in certain pockets. So there's a basis of grievance that why this decision is being taken. Third, platforms themselves are no holy cows here. All three large tech companies which operate large platforms with huge user bases in India, if you just go to the SEC filings, they have all rejected proposals by shareholders for appointments of human rights experts as director positions. So if you do not have corporate governance from the very top happening in these platforms, how can they be champions of this? But here's the thing, the IT rules by themselves are not serving user interest. And I think this is an important point of distinction where I will find disagreement. And I will just read two lines from assessment of international human rights standards published by the joint rapporteurs, three of them of the UN, which is published on 11th of June. As a global leader in technology innovation, India has the potential to develop a legislation that can place it at the forefront of efforts to protect digital rights. However, the substantially broadened scope of the intermediaries rules is likely to do just the opposite. So, for a whole host of reasons, privacy as well as freedom of speech is impacted by these rules without safeguarding and bringing the proper regulatory process through an independent regulator, which we need today. Because these platforms are out of control, quite certainly. People are unsatisfied, criminal cases are piling up, and at the end, there are always accusations of political control of platforms and what are the compromises they're making all across the spectrum. And we need a solution because social media is an essential artifact of digital India and our daily lives today.
No, and it is come to become a huge part of discourse as well. Arvind, here's where I want to come to you on the question of why Twitter and why government versus Twitter has become such a hot issue, even though it relatively has very few users compared to, say, a Facebook or a WhatsApp or any of those other intermediaries. But why Twitter? Twitter perhaps because it is extremely political in nature. The discourse on it is extremely political in nature. People have sides, they have views, they identify themselves and others in various camps, which is why this perception. Now, I want you to comment on the perception, Arvind, because there's no way really to see if it factually exists or not. But the perception right now that the government of India dislikes Twitter because it does not control or hold back those who criticize the government on this platform. What can be done about this perception, and do you think that there is any reality to it?
Well, nothing could be far from the truth. The government has in fact given extra time just to Twitter to comply. And the rules are the same for everybody, whether it's Twitter or WhatsApp. WhatsApp has 25x more user base in India. A lot more, things have been asked in the past of WhatsApp, and this traceability is an issue that we have discussed over 2 to 3 years now, maybe 3 years at least. And I've been involved in discussion 2018-19 on this issue because there are certain child pornography, sexual abuse issues, and of course, public disorder and national security issues. the government also recognizes that technology is evolving. Certain things can be done, certain things cannot. But when single-handedly Twitter itself chooses not to comply and become this so-called champion, and this is where the part I agree with Apar, the 90% part, that it chooses itself not to comply. The government didn't ask it not to comply. All it had to do was comply, with the maybe 9 out of 10 conditions and write back, because most of the platforms have done that. And but Twitter chose to take the moral high ground.
Say we are the champion.
Hypocritical,
just 1 minute, Arvind. Allow me to come in. When did Twitter come and say we are the champion of freedom of speech? Because this statement I've heard again and again from various quarters. How can Twitter call itself champion? But when have they come and said we are the champion of freedom of speech, and we are not complying because we want to uphold freedom of speech?
They have gone to court. They have issued statements saying they are concerned about freedom of expression and speech in India. They have said that these rules prohibit freedom of speech and expression. They lost a court case, if I'm not mistaken, and it is very clear in the way they have been behaving. They
I'm talking about so there are two issues over here. There are two issues over here. No, you're right. You're right in a different context. There are two issues here which are getting bunched up when we're talking about Twitter and the government.
I'm talking about Twitter as a
non-compliance. So why haven't you kept a chief risk officer, a chief compliance officer, or a nodal officer? So Twitter there is saying that yes, we're working on it, and they have perhaps missed that deadline. On the other hand, is the question about why didn't they tag a certain post manipulated media when they tagged another post manipulated media soon enough, but why not this one? So which is the real grouse? Do you want to answer that, Arvind, quickly before I go to Apar and Akriti on that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Twitter has to follow the law, and if the law enforcement agencies are saying that this is the investigation is going on, you have to take this content down. We have given you 24 hours, and they chose, not to act in that, in those for those content out there, and actually, engage in whataboutery. I think Twitter is wrong there. This kind of content has potential to create a lot of communal disharmony and public disorder. So, as simple as that. There is a simple ask, and I think even the fact checkers got caught in it. Their own fact checkers probably got caught in it, and everybody else. And they had to delete a lot of people had to delete a lot of tweets which were found which could be incorrect. I mean, we don't know. Investigation is going on.
Yeah, investigation is going on. Akriti, so, I want to make that distinction about two issues right now when it comes to compliance. One is that there's a set of intermediary guidelines which include that you have to hire certain people in India so that they can, be there to receive grievances of users. And Twitter has been tardy in some of them. They've said that they are doing at the best they can and they will comply, etc. So that is one part of it. The other part, and this is where it gets a bit sticky, is whether Twitter is being arbitrary in deciding what to tag as manipulative media and what not to. And here I find that there's sometimes at the receiving ends across the political spectrum. Those who are opposed to the government feel that they are not taking down stuff soon enough. Those who are for the government say that they are being discriminatory. So over here, do you think that there is any clarity on what Twitter is doing wrong? Is there a process that they must explain how they tag things as manipulated media or when they take things down?
Yeah, I think at the heart of this entire problem, and this is not the first time that, Twitter or Facebook is being challenged for, favoring a certain kind of political speech over the other. I think the problem here is the entire ecosystem in which the platforms are moderating speech. Now, again, platforms like Twitter, and Twitter is not alone in this again, have been very opaque about the way in which they tag certain kind of media or suspend certain accounts. And this is because, the challenges with their speech policies, with their, content moderation policies, we are not always very clear about the standards, who's applying them. The Facebook controversy last year, where it was accused of favoring some political speech of the ruling party, is another example. So I think here we need to get back to the drawing board to really figure out how platforms can work with the government, can be more transparent in their speech decision making. Because until this piece is sorted out, any unilateral law or obligation is ultimately not going to work out, and we'll have situations where one platform is getting in a sticky situation for one post or the other. So there needs to be a more structured approach for platforms to come out, be accountable, and make more locally sensitive speech moderation policies for the benefit of users, because ultimately it's the users right now who are at loss in this continuing battle between the platforms and government.
Apar, it comes down to the basic point about who decides what needs to go off and what not, and how do we protect against a situation where any government will want to bear down on a social media platform to hold back or pull back or muzzle information and content which will go against it.
So Tamanna, I've been a participant in these conversations very actively since UPA too, where there were intermediaries rules even brought at that point in time. The minister at that point was Mr. Kapil Sibal, who suggested a pre-screening mechanism,
Absolutely.
if you remember. So let us remember, there's an inherent interest in government always to regulate any media ecology, okay? This has been a learning not only in India, but globally, because the media essentially is at a fundamental juncture where it can shine an independent narrative and critique an institution, okay? What we need is a statutory mechanism, an independent regulator to follow a much more constitutional path. Now, these are very high-sounding ideals, but can it be achieved? And I think that is the conversation Akriti is prompting. And I think that is a legislative mandate we need to take up collectively, because it's not about Twitter, Facebook, or Google. It's about the people of India who are coming online in greater numbers than ever before. And the thing is, we are going to disagree with each other, right? But we should not make spaces which permit hate speech, as well as this growing polarity which is just emerging, this toxicity which we all feel on social media. I think that is where we need to address this. And I think it is possible if we follow this through a legislative mandate, not through the IT rules, which is an executive notification, and is still not subject to parliamentary oversight or review right now. And what I would suggest is that here, the United Kingdom is already taking a certain step ahead with the Online Harms Act, with the duty of care principle. That's also under dispute by certain scholars. We need to chart our own path. We have a very good constitution, a written constitution, and we have great judgments also now, which have built up a good jurisprudence. We also have the largest market for these platforms, and it would be unbecoming if we don't take the lead legislatively.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. We have a huge population eager to voice their opinion. I mean, social media has put everyone on their toes, from heads of states to traditional media to newsmakers. Everyone is on their toes because they know that anyone with a smartphone and an opinion can share what they have to say. That's a beautiful thing, but it has to be within an ambit which is agreeable to all. I want to thank all of you for this discussion, because this is the kind of discussion we should be having. Different points of views, but no one's yelling, shouting, or making toxic accusations. We're sitting down and we're trying to figure a way out which works for everyone. So thank you for that, Apar, Arvind, and Akriti.